At the Crossroads of Empire, Vietnam, India, China. Struggling to define their own linguistic and literary roles in relation to long-standing local and imperial traditions, South and East Asian writers of the 19th century were also caught between imperial struggles. Their writings reveal a complex variety of attitudes, all of them profoundly ambivalent. Expanding European empires headed eastward as writers tried to make sense of colonialization and its political and cultural impacts. The image on your screen shows parts of South and East Asia during the 19th century. China ruled Vietnam from 111 BCE until 939 CE. In the late 18th century, the Tao Song peasant uprising briefly took over the country, but in 1802, a new emperor from within Vietnam, Gia Long, overthrew them and reinstated orthodox laws modeled after those of China. The French, eager for new markets for their own products, opened trade with Vietnam and invaded in the late 1850s to establish its imperial stretch. By the end of the 19th century, French Indochina included all of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. French companies made huge profits from Vietnamese rubber, coal, and sugar, while poverty, disease, and starvation for the indigenous people became commonplace. The French were not expelled until World War II by Imperial Japan. India passed from the Mughal Empire, controlled by Hindus, to a Muslim empire during the 17th century, then to the British Empire in 1804, when the British East India Company officially took control. The East India Company initially left local leaders in power, but later tried to impose what they felt were superior moral, linguistic, and cultural traditions on India. This is a photograph of Queen Victoria, who lived 1819 to 1901, in July 1893, accompanied by her Indian Munshi, her personal secretary and attendant, Abdul Karim, who was one of her closest confidants during the final 15 years of her reign. The Queen was an early adopter of the typewriter, which she used for her official correspondence. In 1857, Hindu soldiers rebelled against the British Army, triggering a large insurrection by both Hindu and Muslim leaders. The empire responded with repressive new measures and installed British-born administrators to manage Indian affairs. By mid-century, English had replaced Persian as the official language of law, diplomacy, and administration. The British proposed setting up an Indian National Congress that would represent Indian public opinion in a controlled way in 1885. Gandhi, among others, demanded self-rule, which was called Swaraj, which led to full independence in 1947. By 1800, the population in China strained food sources and erupted in peasant rebellions. The British began smuggling opium from India into China, leading to massive consumer demand and addiction. The British warships responded to the Chinese attempt to ban opium imports by attacking the coastline and taking over Chinese ports. The Opium Wars lasted more than 100 years, and civil war further weakened the ruling Qing dynasty. Hong Xiuquan declared himself a younger brother of Jesus, sent to expel foreigners from China and declaring a heavenly kingdom of great peace. The British and French supported the Qing emperor in favor of a peasant regime, but Russia seized China during the upcoming decades, the 1860s and 1890s, and China later lost a war with Japan and Korea. Here's a photograph of men in a Chinese opium den from about 1900. As Europeans spread Christianity and established industry, the Boxer Rebellion arose in 1900. A peasant uprising that was quelled by the British. A revolution broke out in 1911, and the Chinese established Sun Yat-sen as the first president of the Chinese Republic. This image depicts a rout of foreign troops by Boxers at the Beikong near Tianjin. Yu's The Tale of Kieu is a 3,000-line Vietnamese epic about a woman forced into prostitution and slavery that also parallels the history of Vietnam as a nation that has been attacked by invaders and oppressed by tyrants. Yu was born to a learned and powerful family, was well educated, but lost status when his family lost stature after the Tao Sun peasant revolt. In 1802, he pledged loyalty to a new ruler, Jia Long, whom he nevertheless viewed as illegitimate. This may be reflected in the poem itself. Under the new regime, he was highly regarded as a poet and made ambassador to China in 1813. Ghalib was a descendant of Turkish military settlers in North India, and his family ranked as minor nobles in the Muslim ruling class of the 19th century under the Mughal emperor's army. When he was 13, the family arranged his marriage to an 11-year-old girl from a wealthier segment of the nobility. He moved to Delhi in 1810, where the two lived. He He wrote poetry both in Urdu and Persian. When Indian princes rose up in an unsuccessful revolt against Britain in 1857, Ghalib's court patronage ended. Most of his adult life remained unfulfilled due to the failure to secure aristocratic patronage or British pension. He wrote poetry mastering the ghazal, a sequence of couplets in a single meter that are connected by an end-rhyme phrase, and is a form considered one of the most demanding metrical forms in world poetry. Louis was born in Jiangsu province on the east coast of China. His father was a government official, and Liu was known as a wild, rebellious, and energetic youth. He joined a small religious sect that combined Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, and thereby became more disciplined and responsible while maintaining his outspoken characteristic. The Yellow River flooded in 1888, after which Liu went to work for the Director General on a conservancy project, using his own eccentric methods. He began working on the travels of Lao Khan in 1904 as one of several socially critical novels of that period that attacked corrupt government and tradition. As a result, the author was falsely accused of treason and exiled to the far northwest, where he died a year later. An orphan teenager, Rumabai traveled on foot across India, arriving in Calcutta in 1878, where the city's all-male priests and scholars found her knowledge of Sanskrit and religious texts so extraordinary that they awarded her the title of Great Female Scholar, making her the first woman in Indian modern history to receive this rare honor. Ramabai converted from Orthodox Hindus to Christianity, becoming a missionary and devoting herself to reforming the lives of Indian women. She wrote in both Marathi and English. Trips to England and the United States informed her writings on women's rights. She was criticized sharply in India for her attempts to change the status and treatment of widows. This map shows the degree to which areas in India, China, and Southeast Asia were affected by various cultural forces, including long-standing imperial traditions of their own, as in China and India especially, along with new incursions from European imperial powers such as Britain and France. In areas of southern China, for example, both British and French empires exerted their influence. The European presence across Asia often produced a cultural hybridity, and many writers were left to puzzle over how they could relate to new European ideas and to their native traditions. And while in some cases the mixing of East and West might have produced interesting new artistic possibilities, if not unusual photo opportunities, the imposition of Western culture and religion onto other cultures has dramatic negative effects. Often, indigenous citizens immediately become second-class citizens in their own homes due to colonial policies that affected all aspects of life, including governance, religion, education, and social mores. So let's test your knowledge. Which of the following had, for the most part of ancient history, been the superpower in East Asia? The Mughal Empire, Europe, India, or China? Pause your video and make your selection. For many centuries, China had been the great unchallenged superpower in East Asia. Writers in both South and East Asia found themselves in the 19th century at a crossroads, where great empires were meeting with increasingly strong movements for native independence. Which empire took control of India by the middle of the 19th century, displacing the long-ruling Mughal Empire? The British, the Dutch, the French, or the Chinese? Please pause the video and make your selection. The British Empire, which controlled all of India by the mid-19th century, was, during its height, the largest empire that ever existed and included fully 1/4 of the world's population. The empire was so expansive, it was often claimed that the sun never set on the British Empire. The Vietnamese writer Nguyen Yu is a good example of a writer who disavowed imperial traditions completely, embraced imperial traditions completely, embraced local traditions completely, embraced both local and imperial traditions. Pause the video and make your selection. Nguyen Yu is a writer who, like many writers of his time period, cherished some aspects of the traditions of imperial China, though he was equally ready to embrace and promote local Vietnamese linguistic and literary traditions. British presence in India was initially motivated primarily by which of the following? Commerce, religion, politics, or exploration? Pause the video and make your selection. Initially, British interest in India was primarily commercial. However, through the 19th century, Britain's interest in India became less purely commercial and more cultural. It installed its own administrators, for example, and began actively trying to convert Indians to Christianity. The British began smuggling which of the following into China from India? Coal, rice, tea, or opium? Pause the video and make your selection. During the 19th century, the British began smuggling opium from India into China against the wishes of the Chinese emperor. Huge numbers of Chinese and Britons became addicted to the drug. What is sometimes called the Chinese opium trade is more correctly understood as the British opium trade. Thank you for listening to my video. Bye.